October 12, 1945. The humid air of Okinawa carries the acrid scent of destruction, mixed with the salt breeze from the East China Sea. In a makeshift processing center constructed from the remnants of what was once Naha's administrative district, 43 Japanese women sit in rigid formation on wooden benches, worn smooth by countless occupants. Their hands clutch small bundles, the last vestiges of lives that existed before the thunder of artillery transformed their world into ash and memory. Among them sits Michiko Tanaka, a 26-year-old teacher whose fingers trace the edges of a small photograph concealed within the folds of her torn kimono. The image, barely larger than her palm, shows her infant daughter and elderly mother standing before their family shrine in Kumamoto. It is all she has left of a world that no longer exists. Around her, the other women maintain the same posture of resigned acceptance they have learned to wear like armor. Eyes downcast, shoulders square, prepared for the systematic stripping away of dignity that has become synonymous with defeat. The sound of approaching boots echoes against concrete walls scarred by shrapnel. American voices drift through the humid air, their cadence foreign and incomprehensible to ears trained only in the musical inflections of Japanese. These women have been taught since childhood that surrender means shame beyond redemption, that foreign occupation brings degradation worse than death. They have heard the whispered stories from mainland refugees, tales of systematic humiliation, of personal possessions confiscated and destroyed, of photographs torn apart while families watch in helpless horror. For these women, the approaching Americans represent not liberation, but the final chapter of their systematic erasure from existence. They have already lost their homes to firebombs, their husbands to the endless hunger of war, their children to evacuation orders that scattered families like autumn leaves in a typhoon. Now they expect to lose the last tangible connections to their former lives. The small photographs, the precious letters, the tiny keepsakes that serve as anchors to their humanity in an ocean of chaos. The heavy doors swing open with a metallic groan. Sergeant James Mitchell, a 24-year-old farm boy from Iowa, enters, accompanied by Corporal Maria Santos, the Nisei translator. Santos begins to speak in careful Japanese, her accent revealing her American upbringing, but her words carrying unexpected gentleness. She explains the processing procedure, the documentation requirements, the temporary housing arrangements. Then comes the moment these women have been dreading, the personal effects inspection. One by one they are called forward. Michiko watches as the woman before her approaches the wooden table where Mitchell sits, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he examines each item. When he discovers a small photograph of a baby tucked inside a woman's sleeve, the expected reaction does not come. Instead of confiscating the image or tearing it in half as demonstration of power, Mitchell studies it for a moment, then carefully hands it back. "Tell her," he says to Santos, "that her child is beautiful." The translator's voice wavers slightly as she conveys the message. The woman's eyes, which had been squeezed shut in anticipation of loss, flutter open in confusion. She looks from the photograph in her hands to Mitchell's face, searching for deception or cruelty. Finding neither, she bows deeply and returns to her seat, clutching the image against her chest. This scene repeats with mechanical precision, yet each iteration carries its own small miracle. A grandmother's wedding portrait is examined and returned. A young mother's family shrine photograph is studied with respectful curiosity, then handed back with a careful nod. A teenage girl's picture of her deceased father in military uniform is treated not as enemy propaganda, but as a daughter's treasured memory. When Michiko's turn arrives, her legs barely support her weight. She approaches the table with the careful steps of someone walking toward an execution. Her hands shake as she produces the photograph of her daughter and mother, expecting it to join the imaginary pile of confiscated memories she had envisioned growing throughout the morning. Mitchell takes the photograph and studies it with the same careful attention he has given to each before it. Through Santos, he asks about the people in the image. Michiko's voice is barely a whisper as she explains that her daughter is now living with relatives in Kyushu, that her mother died in the bombing of Kumamoto, that this single image represents the entirety of her family history that survived the war. Instead of the harsh scrutiny or dismissive "And I lost my mother last winter while I was training for this campaign. I understand what it means to hold on to these memories." He returns the photograph to Michiko's trembling hands with a carefulness that suggests he is handling something sacred. The small gesture sends shockwaves through her understanding of the world. American soldiers, she had been taught, were demons in human form, interested only in conquest and humiliation. Yet this young man, this supposed enemy, has treated her most precious possession with more respect than many of her own countrymen showed to foreign artifacts in the museums they had looted. The processing continues throughout the day, and word spreads among the women about the unexpected treatment they are receiving. Personal photographs are not just being returned, they are being treated as valuable possessions worthy of protection. Letters from deceased family members are carefully examined for security purposes, but then folded back into their original places. Small jewelry items, wedding rings, family seals, all the tiny anchors to identity that these women expected to lose, are being preserved and protected. As the afternoon sun filters through the damaged roof of the processing center, something unprecedented begins to occur. The rigid posture of resigned defeat that had characterized these women since their arrival begins to soften. Whispered conversations start among the benches, not the fearful murmurs of people awaiting execution, but tentative exchanges of amazement at their treatment. Michiko finds herself seated next to Keiko Hayashi, a widow from Shuri, whose husband died in the defense of the city. Keiko clutches a small scroll containing a poem her husband wrote for their anniversary, returned to her with the same respectful care given to all personal items. "They treated it like it was important," she whispers, her voice filled with confusion and wonder. "Like it mattered to them that it mattered to me." This simple observation captures something these women are struggling to understand. They had prepared themselves for systematic dehumanization, for treatment as conquered enemies worthy only of contempt. Instead, they are encountering something their wartime education had taught them was impossible. Americans who recognize their humanity, not despite their defeat, but as something that exists independent of political circumstances. The contrast between expectation and reality creates a form of psychological whip. These are the same Americans who dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, who reduced their cities to ash and their lives to chaos. Yet here, in this damaged building on a devastated island, individual American soldiers are treating their personal possessions with reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. Sergeant Mitchell, unaware of the philosophical revolution he is precipitating, continues his methodical work. Each photograph he examines tells a story of loss that mirrors his own experiences. The wedding portraits remind him of the ceremony he attended just before shipping out to the Pacific. The pictures of children echo the daughter he left behind in Iowa, growing up with only letters to remember her father by. The images of elderly parents connect to his own grief over his mother's death while he was training for an invasion he hoped would never come. For Mitchell and the other American soldiers conducting these proceedings, treating personal belongings with respect is not a matter of policy. It is an expression of shared humanity that transcends the artificial boundaries of war. They recognize in these photographs the same hopes, fears, and loves that motivate their own actions. The woman clutching her baby's picture is not fundamentally different from Mitchell's own wife, who carries his photograph in her purse while working at the defense plant back home. This recognition of common humanity represents something revolutionary in the context of Pacific warfare, where racial hatred and dehumanization had reached levels of intensity that shocked even hardened veterans of European combat. The propaganda machines of both nations had worked tirelessly to convince their populations that the enemy was fundamentally different, essentially evil, unworthy of the basic courtesies extended to fellow human beings. Yet here, in the mundane process of cataloguing personal effects, individual soldiers on both sides are discovering shared values that their governments had insisted did not exist. The reverence these Japanese women show for family photographs mirrors the same reverence American soldiers show for pictures from home. The grief evident in their faces when they speak of lost family members is identical to the grief that clouds American eyes when letters arrive with news of deaths back home. As evening approaches and the processing nears completion, the psychological transformation among the women becomes increasingly evident. The rigid formality of defeated. This shift in understanding extends beyond their immediate circumstances to challenge fundamental assumptions about American character and intentions. These women had been taught that American abundance came at the expense of others, that American democracy was a facade concealing imperial ambitions no different from Japan's own. Yet the careful treatment of their personal possessions suggests a different understanding of power, one that extends protection even to the defeated, that recognizes value in things that hold no strategic importance. The photograph in Michiko's hands has become more than a family memento. It has transformed into a symbol of unexpected grace. Its preservation represents not just American respect for Japanese family values, but a more profound recognition that human dignity transcends national boundaries. The American soldier who returned it to her hands was acknowledging that her love for her family was as valid and important as his own love for his family. This recognition carries implications that extend far beyond the immediate circumstances of occupation. It suggests that American ideals of individual dignity and freedom are not merely propaganda tools, but principles that guide behavior even toward former enemies. The decision to preserve these photographs was not mandated by military regulation or occupation policy. It arose from individual choices made by American soldiers who recognized the fundamental humanity of the people they had been fighting. For women who had spent years believing that American victory would mean the complete erasure of Japanese culture and values, this preservation of family photographs represents a form of cultural validation that challenges every assumption they held about American intentions. They are discovering that American power, at least as exercised by individual soldiers, includes the capacity for mercy that extends beyond strategic calculation to encompass basic human compassion. As the last of the women complete their processing and prepare to leave for temporary housing, Michiko pauses at the doorway of the processing center. The photograph of her daughter and mother remains safely tucked within her kimono, its presence a constant reminder of the day her understanding of the world fundamentally changed. She turns back to look at Sergeant Mitchell, who is organizing papers for the next day's arrivals. Through Corporal Santos, she offers a simple phrase that carries more weight than any formal expression of gratitude. "Thank you for letting me keep my family." Mitchell's response, equally simple, encompasses the broader philosophical framework that has guided American behavior throughout this processing. Family is the most important thing any of us have. Why would we take that away from you? This exchange, conducted through a translator between former enemies in a damaged building on a devastated island, captures something essential about the nature of American democracy that extends beyond constitutional frameworks and political structures. It reveals a fundamental respect for individual dignity that persists even in the aftermath of total war, a recognition that human values transcend national boundaries and political differences. The photographs these women carry with them into their uncertain future represent more than preserved memories. They embody proof that American democracy, at its best, extends protection to the defeated and dignity to the displaced. They serve as tangible evidence that American abundance includes an abundance of compassion, that American strength encompasses the strength to show mercy to those who no longer pose any threat. In the months and years that follow, as Japan rebuilds under American occupation, These women will discover that the respect shown for their family photographs was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of American behavior that prioritizes human dignity over conquest, individual rights over collective punishment, and shared humanity over national divisions. The small photographs they were allowed to keep become symbols of a larger truth about American democracy, that it functions best not through the exercise of power over others, but through the recognition that power carries with it the responsibility to protect what matters most to human beings: family, memory, and the small physical objects that anchor identity in a chaotic world. Years later, when Michiko's daughter asks about her grandmother she never met, Michiko will show her the preserved photograph and tell the story of the American soldier who understood that some things matter more than victory. The image will continue to serve its original purpose, preserving family memory across generations. But it will also carry an additional meaning: proof that even in humanity's darkest hours, individual choices to show compassion can illuminate possibilities for understanding that transcend the artificial boundaries created by war. The photograph survives not just as a family heirloom, but as evidence of a moment when American ideals of human dignity overcame the dehumanizing logic of total war, when individual American soldiers chose to recognize the humanity of their former enemies, not through grand gestures or formal proclamations, but through the simple act of allowing mothers to keep pictures of their children, wives to preserve images of their husbands, and daughters to maintain connections to parents they would never see again. In this small gesture of allowing Japanese women to keep their family photographs, we witness the true power of American democracy, not its capacity to defeat enemies, but its ability to transform them from objects of hatred into fellow human beings deserving of the same respect and dignity that Americans extend to their own families. The photographs become symbols not of American conquest, but of American character, revealed in moments when power chooses to protect rather than destroy, to preserve rather than erase, to honor the universal human values that connect us all across the artificial divisions of nation, race, and creed.